What if you had served in the military and felt the need to present the stories of other veterans you had served with in a deeper way? What if your time in college became a doorway to seeing a larger vision towards making your calling a reality? What if the situation progressed into a 10-year journey that brought you to various places to talk with some of the most incredible people you had ever met? Join me as I talk with Tim Kolzak about his experience in the development of what began as a school project and turned into something that brought him all over the globe to talk with fellow veterans about their experiences within the military and the journey to where they stand today. This is Veteran Success Story. Welcome to another episode of Veteran Success Story. In today's episode, I sit down with Tim K, founder of the Veterans Project, as well as, his involvement within the different projects in the veterans space. It's commendable. It's amazing to see what he's done, where he's gone with things, and what he's currently doing in restarting the Veterans Project, revitalizing some of the old episodes out there. So we get into it in the episode, so I'm not going to talk about it here. But if you could, so that I can continue with these episodes, if you enjoy it, tell a friend, follow, subscribe. That's how I'm going to be able to keep this channel free. Is monetizing through these different platforms, but I want to continue to do so and continue to bring the information from these guests to the audience out there in order to inspire and inform you guys about either stuff that's happening within the veteran space, or if someone wants to head into their own journey where some of these other guys have been. So I know for myself, it's been a heck of a journey in putting even just this thing together. So it's been good. It's been extremely rewarding, but I will tell you right now, I'll warn you, it is a journey. So without getting any further into it, I'm going to roll the episode, but thanks for joining us on yet another veteran success story. Welcome to another veteran success story. Today, I'm joined with Tim Kolzak, who is the host, you're starting this project back up, but the Veterans Project podcast, which is storytelling through other veterans and like they're back in their story, what they're doing now. But Tim, it's great to have you on the show just because of really, I know we were talking about it beforehand, but the level of production quality that you built into that thing, even from the very start, the amount of thought put in, and we had some laughs about a few of the things experienced, and we'll get into it in the show, but just it's phenomenal what you've done with it, what you did with it. I'm happy as heck to see those things starting to pop back up, and I'm like, oh, what's going on here? So that's really, why I reached out and why I wanted to have you on, to know what's going on with the Veterans Project here, and what has Tim got going on in his life to where these are starting to pop back up.
Yeah, that's a good question. I had a great conversation. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for having me on. It's a privilege to be here, and it's a privilege for other people to share our stories. So I appreciate you being willing to share mine. But I had talked to an old podcast producer friend of mine named Jacob Phillips, who's just an incredibly talented voice actor, and he was also on the podcast as well. And he was like, man, I feel like this work is so important, and I really feel like there is beauty to this work, and it's something powerful that can impact a lot of people in their lives. And um, you seem to be much happier when you're doing the work. So it's one of those things where I just felt like, there was a way to where we might be able to monetize the YouTube channel in the future, because I just hadn't really done much with the YouTube channel. And so getting to share some of these old stories and watching those stories like resonate with people in the future, Michael Rodriguez, people like that who've just done an incredible, president of the Global War on Terror Memorial Foundation. And it's it's amazing to be able to get to share these stories again and see that some of these quotes still resonate with people and are also resonating with people and will resonate with people in the future. So I think there is just an incredible power in storytelling, and so it's definitely been a privilege to kind of reinvigorate the work and see what, see what's next.
It's funny that you mentioned Michael Rodriguez because I was actually in touch with him recently. I had someone on that's an ambassador for the Global War on Terror Foundation, a memorial foundation there. And we had actually talked about doing one with him at where they're at now and what they're doing with that. And one of, your episode with him is one of them that I was listening to in the research, behind his end. And it's just funny that that's the one you went to because it's, that was the one I was listening to not too long ago, actually. I think that's the last full episode I listened to, but that's more recently. But I mean, I've listened to a few of them. And I mean, really, storytelling, you're not wrong there. Storytelling, it's something that goes back to our primal days, as humans and stuff. That's how things got passed along. That's how knowledge was shared in one way or another. And these stories really are. It's just a way to where it resonates with people and it sticks with them. So these stories to be able to glean things from there, but it really does. It sticks with people. You want to get a little bit into how you got started and a little bit about your backstory, either service and then post service leading up to what led you to the Veterans Project?
Absolutely. So I had just returned from Iraq. I was in the Texas Army National Guard, and I played baseball in college at Southwestern Assembly of God University. So I came back after my tour of Iraq and finished my last 2 years of college playing ball. Ended up as the closer on that baseball team and had a great time. Just it was such a privilege to be able to step on the field. And, without turning this into a baseball podcast, I just want to say like the power of stepping on that third baseline after you've been overseas and, getting to be amongst your friends. And, I had a friend who was standing next to me and he even teared up and I was like, man, why are you tearing up, bro? And he was like, dude, he goes, I know what this has to mean to you to be able to be back here on this field. And just getting to hear the national anthem play was, still sends chills down my spine to think about that. So I was in the middle of, I finished my college baseball career. I went to my master's program really because I didn't feel like I knew what I wanted to do. I just didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. So I went to UT Dallas, University of Texas at Dallas, and I started on a master's degree in emerging media and communication. So I tell people all the time that basically, like, I've got my master's degree in Facebook. So, like, that probably dates me a little bit. But yeah, so. It was an incredible experience, and really what I learned during that master's degree program was the love of photography because I had been a digital media arts student before, so I had done some script writing and directing and a little bit of that during my bachelor's, but I didn't really know still photography that well. I just had this feeling and this sense of drive that it was something that I wanted to do, and I believe that's something that the Lord built into me. So I feel privileged to be able to do that. But I finished I was actually in the middle of my master's degree, and I had this professor named Marilyn Wallagore, who was a photography professor, and she pulled me aside, and I was fortunate to even be accepted into some of the photography courses because, you got to think like I have my bachelor's in digital media, but I didn't really have any still photography experience. So her even allowing me in was incredible. So I learned a lot. That first year was just kind of spent trying not to burn the studio down. So, like just learning, and um I remember she pulled me aside after one of my classes into her office and she told me a story about how she had been a Vietnam War protester um and she had, lived in Berkeley, and so she told me that story, and I felt kind of angry when I heard that because it was like, man, those were my older brothers, that that had been mistreated. But I remember her telling me, she said, I really feel like you have a niche in veteran storytelling. And I was like, Oh, I don't want to do that. Like, I had no desire really to tell veteran stories. Like, I was already, I just gotten out of the military, so I was like, I don't really want to go back into that world. And, but really, she was giving me one of my best gifts, and I didn't even realize it at the time. And so I was like, I'm sure there are like 15 or 20 other people doing this right now. Like, I'm gonna look at it. She goes, I think you would be surprised, Tim. And so I like looked into it, and there was very little that was being done on Iraq and Afghanistan. And so I was like, okay, I'll give it a shot, And we did 4 projects, and those projects were just extremely powerful because they really opened my eyes to just how diverse our community is. I had no idea how diverse we were, and so these first 4 stories were just incredible. And that's really what motivated me into future pursuit of the work, including, one of my former squad leaders. I was Carter Chick, who I was able to share his story of, having been in the Marine Corps in Somalia and then, joining the Army and serving overseas in different capacities and his experience and loss and all that. And then, getting to sit in these rooms with him while he was being counseled, on his post-traumatic stress and just watching the suffering that he was going through because he was a shell of himself. He was the shell of the man that I had seen overseas. And so about a year later, tragically, he took his own life. But I remember one of the most powerful parts of my experience with him was him telling me, like, Tim, you have to keep doing this work. Like, it's really important to us, to all of us. And so that became like my burning drive and desire to continue the work was that. And so it's interesting because there's obviously it's tragedy, the loss of him is tragic to his family. He left a couple of sons behind and a wife, but we were able to take that project and then keep moving forward. And I thought to myself, if we didn't tell that story, we didn't share his story, who would have known Carter Chick? And so there's incredible power in that can resonate through generations who continue to read his story. So that was really powerful. And then just the remarks in the comments after we showed this capstone project to a crowd of liberal arts students. There were Muslims sitting in the room, there were Hindus sitting in the room, there were all different kinds of populations, and I kind of sat back with trepidation because I'm like, I don't know what the reaction is going to be to this work after I shared it. And the room was just silent. And I remember, several people being in tears, and then everybody started clapping. And we ended up getting second place in that capstone work, but it was incredible. And I remember one of the judges walked up to me afterwards and he was like, man, you've got to keep doing this work, Tim. It's very powerful. And I believe that you won this capstone project. But and he shook my hand and he said, by the way, I'm a US Navy veteran. And I was like, wow, man, well, thank you, I appreciate that. So it's been an incredible process, almost over a decade now of getting to share those stories. And so that really became the drive. And, a word that's always used is passion. And I've come to realize through some of my friends that I think that's kind of an overrated word. I think that it's really about drive, discipline, and motivation. And that drive is so important, being disciplined enough to get into the art and to continue to practice that because passion is an emotion. And I know why people say it. And I used to say it all the time. This is my passion.
Yeah.
But in all reality, like that's an emotional reaction, and that's not going to keep you invested in the work. At the end of the day, I've felt a lack of passion with the work before too, and I've taken time off, but it's really the discipline to sit down and do the work and put the hours in and invest the time and show love for the community. It's the greatest of these is love. And I think love is so important in this community and moving forward. It's like showcasing the triumph that these guys went through, that our brothers and sisters have gone through. So kind of a long way of answering your question, but there's a real power to the project in that people getting to share their stories can resonate for generations to come.
Oh, the journey is not an easy one, and it's not something that happens overnight. And it's something where you literally have to steel yourself and sit down and with what you're saying, passion. It's almost when I think of passion, it's a lot of times sure, you can have passion for something, but a lot of that almost seems like a match. You know, it burns bright and then it goes out. You know, that drive end of things, you have to have something behind it that keeps that fire stoked. You might have that feel to the calling there, you know, but what's going to bring you through it? And I know, geez, a lot of times, um, you know, I mean, most relatable to me would be, you know, this, but also the book and stuff on that end of writing that book down about our memoirs and stuff overseas, um, and talking with those guys and stuff. That was never a story I wanted to write. You know, it was something that it took me 10 plus years to put down to paper, and I was like, I don't want to get sucked back into this. But at the same time, there was always that voice in the back of your head saying, hey, you really need to pursue this. You need to do it. Um, but not seeing the path on how, or not fully being invested into it. And then having that hit, and then taking from those times though that we had that gave us that resilience to keep moving forward, to keep going through. I mean, an almost damn near impossible situation to where you just had to be like, hey, we're going back out there day after day. Um, but taking that same mentality and going, okay, this is a long road, and you know this is a long road. There's an end somewhere, and you know you can figure it out along the way, or you won't, and that's okay too. But you're gonna learn something along the way, and this might not be the end all be all. But how much are you going to be able to pull from this? And really, even now, you know, only a few episodes into this thing, in comparison, here is the amount of good that's come from it, either in meeting people or in hearing some of the stories or implementing some of the stuff that I've learned along the way with this. Because this is a learning project for me too. I mean, the veteran success story, I'm not the success here. I will tell you that right now. I might have done something that gleaned a little bit from, but yeah, I'm most definitely not the success here. This is the path. This is the path and the way. And I'm learning along the way. But the thing is I'm also learning from these other people, and making acquaintances along the way, to where I've reached out actually a few times during and been like, hey, could you help me out here? What do you think about this? And it's been invaluable. You know, it's I'm sure have you had any experiences like that with Veteran Project on that end?
Oh man, so many. I think back to one where, I was sitting down with Evan Hafer from Black Rifle Coffee, and I was sitting in the room with him and Tom Davin, who I don't know what Tom Davin's position is anymore with the company, but I know at the time he was kind of coming into a CEO role, kind of with Evan Hafer. And so we were sitting in the room, and I remember Tom just listening the whole time, and I thought, well, that's a remark of a great man too, is like watching him and he's listening while, Evan's talking on the podcast. And one of the things that Evan said to me was like, we'd had, different corporate leaders come into the room, and I'm like watching these guys, like, I think it was the Yeti CFO and just different people coming into the room where you're just like, man, there are so many high-minded like businessmen in here who know what they want and how they got here, and they're pushing forward. And I'm like, thought, this is incredible. He surrounds himself with some pretty awesome guys. So, one of the things that Evan said to me is that I'm not good at business, Tim, which I still don't think is true. I think he's probably great at business, but he said, I'm not great at business, Tim. He said, honestly, like, I just surround myself with guys who are much smarter than me.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow. So, you'll notice, like I mentioned Jacob Phillips a minute ago, like, I try to surround myself with guys who are better at the work than I am. And, maybe it's not specifically the Veterans Project, but it's other methodologies of storytelling. And so, other people who are in business. And so remark by Evan, I mean, it shows in the proof of what Black Rifle has done. So, that was a comment that really stuck out to me, was him surrounding himself with these incredible businessmen that helped drive the company forward. So that was really cool.
That's a big one to, and really, conversely too, and I've seen it with other people and other people I've served with. A lot of us, when we get that final stamp, or you know, we go home, a lot of guys go back to where their origin kind of was, and they end up right back in the same hole. And that
Yeah.
kind of goes to show that same thing. It is, a lot of it is who you surround yourself with, and if you put turds around you, you're going to sink to that level. Or the crabs in a bucket analogy. I have guys that are hanging out with people that are partying every weekend and drinking and whatnot all the time. And they might have a great idea or something, but then they just end up never doing anything because they keep going back to that crowd and they keep hanging around them. They're like, well, they're my friends. And it's like, tell them you're not drinking this weekend or something, or have them out to do something else and see where it goes, and I've had it happen before, and they come back and they're like, ugh, you were right, man. All right, let's rip off the Band-Aid here. What's the painful step? Yeah. And it can be, once you see that end of it, and your eyes are kind of opened, and sometimes you just don't see that end because that clarity is not there yet. You haven't learned that lesson yet, and you don't see it unless you talk to someone who's been there and they kind of help shine a light on it. And your thing right there that you said too, you're willing to listen to that advice. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's so true. I think we have such a tremendous model, and I think what you said is also true. Is like sometimes we have to learn through our mistakes sometimes, and I've made plenty along the way. And it's something though where you have the roadmap drawn out for you by World War II generation that came back and rebuilt our infrastructure. And, of course, they didn't do everything perfectly, but man, I just admire those guys so much. Like, people ask me all the time is like, what's been the most powerful part of the experience? And I go back to that story of Alfred Hawes. So I don't know if it's okay if I share the story
Oh,
with you, but I really want to talk about Alfred. 1,181 days in a Japanese death camp. Alfred Hawes was in the New Mexico Army National Guard and obviously became a part of the active component. Went overseas in World War II. He's in the Philippines and they're surrounded after MacArthur really just kind of hung out the troops to dry. I think this is well known at this point, but and so a lot of those men were captured and obviously forced march through the jungles in terrifying conditions. Men were dragged behind trucks by the Japanese Imperial Army, driven over, tortured, shot in the back of the head, executed. And Alfred's experience was absolutely horrifying. So he got marched for 3 days back to Camp McDonald, and through this march, uh, a Japanese officer pulled him out of line, pulled him away from the formation, stuck a revolver in his stomach, pulled the trigger 3 times, and the gun didn't go off. And Alfred would tell you like that was the Lord protecting him, and I believe that to be true. But whatever the case, the Japanese officer laughed and then told him to get back in line. And then another day goes by. They bring a Filipino woman out to the middle of the formation. She was, probably like 6 months pregnant, and they slit her belly open and pulled the fetus out of her belly. And the Japanese said to the American GIs, if this is what we'll do to her, imagine what we'll do to you. And so then they get marched to the camp. Alfred's brother is with him, Claude, and it's about 2 weeks into being at the camp, and Alfred's trying to feed Claude, but Claude has given up his will to live, and so he passes away due to starvation and, probably many other diseases. And at that point, the Japanese force Alfred into burying his brother in a hole of about 75 other GIs. And the whole time, they're poking and prodding him with bamboo rods and laughing at him. And, the conditions I try to put myself in that mindset sometimes where I think back like to what that would have been like, and I can't even do it because it's just so horrifying to think about. They didn't have water on the march, didn't hardly have food. The Japanese would often like boil the rice in urine and then give it to the GIs with rocks in it. So you're losing, these men are losing their teeth. And so anyways, after Claude dies and he buries him in that hole, he's forced to go work on the very war machine that's going to kill his brothers in arms. He's, building plane parts in a factory in this camp. And so the bomb over Nagasaki at one point goes off. And this you got to think too, Alfred's being tortured pretty much every day, like 1,181 days of being tortured and sent off to work in this camp. And then the bomb over Nagasaki goes off, and the shockwave actually hit the islands. And they remember hearing the alarms, but they wouldn't let the Americans go into or find shelter. So the shockwave hits, and Alfred was blown into a hole, into a trench about 10 feet deep. And he broke his arm in multiple places. And he could still describe to you the colors that he saw going over his head. Like he remembered what it looked like looking into the shockwave. And his arm broke in multiple places. So back then they didn't have tourniquets. So he took a belt and he fashioned it into a type of tourniquet to tie his arm off at the shoulder, and he almost bled to death. So 8 hours later, he finally gets care from an American doctor in the camp. And the American doctor, there's no anesthetic, so they just saw his arm off at the shoulder. So he comes back to the States weighing like 89 pounds, and he knocks on the door in Temple, Texas. I mean, you'd think like he survived this, which
Yeah.
is incredible. I mean, thousands did not. So, I don't know exact numbers, but many men did not make it through that. So he comes back, he knocks on the door in Temple, Texas, and his mom sees him and faints at the door because she doesn't even recognize him. And the crazy part of that story, I mean, it's the whole thing's a crazy story, but like it's real life. And then he comes back and he becomes a one-armed wildland firefighter in Montana. Like just an incredible man. And so, we got invited to this separate event at Sundance Film Festival. I had a gallery there, probably like 3 weeks after I shared this story. And then he died like shortly before I told this story on a stage there in Park City. And there was a portrait of him on the wall that we had hung up in the gallery. And I remember just pointing to the crowd and saying, like, the whole reason that we get to be in this room right now is that man over on the wall. And I could still feel the environment in that room. So getting to share stories like that are just incredibly powerful. There aren't even really words to encapsulate what it means to tell that story. But I remember telling his daughter, because she was in the nursing home with us in Clovis, New Mexico, or Logan, New Mexico, which is just kind of an old sleepy farming town. And I was thinking, like, this legend went off and did this, and now he's in this nursing home living out his last days, and his daughter's with him, and they're getting to spend this time together. But his daughter was recounting to me, like, how much her dad had not shared of his wartime experiences. So this was really like his first time giving a detailed account of his story. There was like one small article in a local newspaper, but it didn't go into detail. It was basically like Alfred went overseas to Bataan and he was in the death march and a lot of people died, but there was really no sharing of any details. And so,
Yeah.
getting to share that, shortly before he passed away was just incredibly powerful. And it's something I'll never forget for the rest of my life.
Man, and just sharing it at such a real and visceral level. And I do you think he would have, I know it's one thing to sit down with, someone who is a professional news interviewer, okay? Like, and I'm not meaning it in a degrading way, but just someone who, like a civilian who's always been a civilian on that end, and then to sit down with another veteran. Do you think that that kind of had a little bit of a difference with that story and with him, to where I do know I've talked with other people, one in particular, where after the interview, it was almost like he was like, I don't even remember what I said during this. But afterwards, we've had a bunch of people reach out that were overseas with us or had, fought in the GWAT end of things. And they would come out and say, like, man, just that episode really touched me. And it wasn't scripted. It was just a conversation between the two of us. And we got into talking about some of the same ground that we walked, but in some of the same situations. And I know it was a little different in that way, but I've heard it from other people too, like, to where you get on and you talk with them, and afterwards they're just like, it's almost like there's that resonance immediately between veterans out there. And I really do. I think what you're doing with that and opening up, because there is a gap there. You can hear these stories from professional media end of things and everything, but when you have a veteran capturing that story and then understanding the importance of what these people have been through and the far-reaching effects, but also having been there themselves and reached some of those critical moments themselves, and having that either camaraderie or just that type of relationship, because it opens up, and it almost seems like they just very quickly open up. Like how has that is that how's that been on your end?
We've done this for over a decade now, but when we started the project, it was not a popular idea. I remember asking guys to be a part of the work, like in the very first early days, and they're like, "This is a weirdo that wants to like follow me around with a camera," and it's like, like it's interesting because I don't think a lot of guys wanted to open up when, in this was like 2014 time frame. So it might have just been the people that I asked just weren't willing to share their story. But at first, I remember being a little bit discouraged because I was like, man. But I think about it, and it's like there's a built-in humility into what we do.
Yeah.
And that's powerful too. Like, you got to think for so many decades, so many of these World War II veterans were not sharing their stories. It wasn't really until like Saving Private Ryan that guys first started like coming out. And, I'm sure a few had told their stories before that, but I know that in my experience with talking to, one of the guys who was at Normandy, he told me it wasn't really until Saving Private Ryan until that became like a cool thing, it was like World War II veterans were getting honored and there was always kind of a deep admiration, but it was always kind of the public standing back and saying, like, thank you for your service. We'll give you the handshake and then the salute and then move on. But like, as to like really trying to understand the individual, that came later. So for me, I think I was experiencing a little bit of that, and that guys just were wanting to, move on with their lives. And I think I don't know the motivation for not wanting to share the story, but at first it was pretty tough. But it was really one of my friends from who I had recruited into the Texas Army National Guard, like opening up. And I was telling you the story earlier, but I'm just photographing him putting in wood floors and in his house in McKinney, Texas. But it was powerful because he's with his family for the first time after returning from Afghanistan. And so I think that first Tumblr blog, like it was on Tumblr back in the day, was like resonated with people because it's not about the veteran story, really. It's about the human story.
Yeah.
Like you see these pictures, and I can see him in my head of him sitting with his wife Christina and their daughter, and like the picture is blurry. Like it's not even a great photograph, but it's a beautiful photograph because of the meaning behind it.
Yeah.
Him getting to be with his family because think about so many guys didn't get that. They didn't get to come back and love on their family. So it's the power of that is it's incredible. But as time went on, guys began to open up more and more. And back at this time frame, 2014, that's when suicide discussion really began. So a lot of these were really deep, heavy stories, and it became pretty easy to get depressed yourself, like hearing these stories of guys coming back and just, constant combat, talking about dying on the helicopter twice, en route to the hospitals, and, thoughts of suicide and depression. And so, you have to share those stories in the moment because they're incredibly powerful. But as time goes along and you get further removed from those stories, you start thinking about what comes next.
Mhm.
Like, where are we headed? Where are we trying to position ourselves in society? We should go back and try to be the leaders in the community. And I'm not speaking specifically for myself, but I'm saying like there are some incredible men and women that have done some very powerful things in our community that are being perfectly positioned now to be in leadership positions, not just in politics. Like forget politics, just being in your community and becoming leaders in your community, becoming leaders in your home, and being good examples to others. So I think there's a real power in that story of triumph. And so more than anything, this has become like a human storytelling effort for me, not even really about the veteran, but about the human being.
It's a powerful thing, and I think that these stories are it's something that needs to be shared out there. And I do think that there is almost a period of cooling off too. You know, you're kind of like 2014, things are still happening in Afghanistan. Um, is still fresh, and even with some of that, look at how long it took for some of these stories to come out with, you know, World War II, Vietnam. I do think that the veteran community and the people that fought in these conflicts are starting to recognize that, hey, look, we were always taught silent professional, and you know that was one of the things too with interviewing people myself. You know, the guys that I had been with for the book stuff, a lot of them didn't want to, they didn't want to come out and talk about some of it. Some of it, they were just like, man, that doesn't, you shouldn't talk about that. That belongs on the battlefield. And I'm like, no, like that, it's what happened. You know, why wouldn't we talk about that? Because someone else is going to face that same situation. And if they're facing it, you know, blind, you know, as we might have at the time, how much better equipped would they be if, you know, you had brought forth that story or you had presented that end? And it's not like in a glorifying way or, hey, look at me, you know, puff my chest and then walk around, you know, look what we did. It's not that at all. It's being humble enough to be like, hey, this is what I was involved in and this is what we learned. Um, you know, some of it being a triumph, a bunch of it being you know, a learning point or a failure, or even a mix of both. And that's all there. I kind of do think that we're shaped through adversity. And what better way, you know, I mean, war has all just that huge range there to where those hard moments that you face, you know, to where you're seeing the absolute worst of humanity, but you're also seeing some of the absolute best. Uh, and these guys that you served with, that bond is there forever, you know, no, whether you like it or not. And it goes beyond, it transcends beyond that small unit that you were with, because there is, we were just talking about it, that resonance in between veterans. You've really been forged from that, and it's changing your way of thinking to where, you know, you were just mentioning a lot of the suicide stories or, you know, the suicide issue that we have out there. If we don't talk about these things and we don't find this way forward, um, you know, it's a continued mission. It's that dirty secret the Army never tells you, that the mission really never ends once you've joined up. It just keeps going. It continues throughout the years, and really afterwards, you've signed up for a life of service, whether you like it or not. So,
So true. Well,
yeah.
yeah. And you know it so much better than I do, man. I mean, um, the experiences in the Argon Dob, I've heard through Donald McAllister, just, and Don, man, I can't say enough good things about Don. Just an incredible man. And um I don't, specifically know what it was like to serve with him, but I have a feeling that he was a very fearsome man and just an incredible leader at the same time. Somebody who is driven and who would get out there with the guys himself, and just getting to spend time with him in the same room. I mean, it was really a privilege to spend time with you guys, because what you experienced was in many ways hell on earth. And if you think back to, like, you know, Vietnam time frame and like what those guys went through, it's like that was probably like one of the closest examples of that type of hellscape, that type of just terrifying conditions. So I don't know what that's like. I know, Iraq in 2009, but what you experienced was something completely different. So I just want to say that it's an honor to be able to talk to you guys and get to hear about your experiences. And it's great that you chose to put yourself out there and write this book for the brotherhood and for the experience and for other people that they might learn from this tremendous history. Um, because it is so important that people hear these stories, man. And so thank you for what you've done. I appreciate your service.
Oh, Tim, it's guys like you that are supporting out there, you know, as well as you served as well, man. It's not, you rose your hand, you know, you don't know what you're going to be called into. That's the thing. That's really the thing, is you raise your hand to go and serve, and wherever you end up is kind of needs of the Army. So I mean, it's a crapshoot. I could have been somewhere else, or there. What episode did you have Don on?
Whew.
We'll have
That
to look. I'll put
was
it in the I'll put it in the links or something like that. Just because, like, he's on there. He still keeps a finger on that pulse of things, and he's still out there taking that leadership role in a way. It's changed over time, but he's still taking that leadership role and that charge of like, hey, I got to be there for the guys. What do you need? And he leaves it that same thing, like that open door policy deal. But it really is. If anyone ever wants to get a hold of him, he's like, give me a call, shoot me a text, figure it out, get a hold of me. He's not hard to find, and you get a hold of anybody in the unit, most of them still have his phone number, so, and, and he's out there trying to do something better in the community and for the community at the same time. And it's cool to have known leadership like that and to be able to reach out maybe to the guys that back then you might have been terrified to talk to, because he was it was, I think, the first book he ended up in, it was referred to as Mac the hard ass, and he was, but that discipline and that way of disciplining us, or building that discipline into our infantry company. The thing is that was a form of love, because that is what ended up keeping people disciplined enough in something like the Argandab to do the right thing and not fall apart, not degrade, not, I don't think anybody would have faulted, and people from other companies did. Like, it started to be an issue to where it's like guys are refusing to go out, or, our company never had that issue. And there was a few issues to where guys, they didn't want to go out, but the other guys bolstered that person, and they would get behind him and be like, look, I'm right out there with you. Or, you know what? You don't want to take point this time? That's fine, man. I got you. Like, I'll just get up there. It's all right. Whatever's going to happen happens. And building that foundation and having somebody that built a foundation like that, that's huge. You don't get someone to that level in the civilian world. Most times it's who can they pass the buck off to, instead of who's going to own it and really get in there. And sometimes that mantle of leadership is not what it appears to be. Sometimes it's a lot harder than people realize. So, like, on that side of things. But yeah, no, I'm fortunate to have known someone like that, especially before heading into something like the Argandab, you know. And that was awesome that you covered that story too. It was really cool to see him showing up on your show and getting that end of it. Because I think on that one he talked a lot more about his experience in Iraq, I want to say,
Mhm.
as opposed to the Argandab. And I know there was kind of reasons for that. He's talked about it to where he's like, I still don't really talk to other people who weren't there, because they just don't understand on what that was like. It was just, you know, hell on earth.
Mm.
So,
Yeah, yeah,
man.
yeah.
Tim, so, like, moving into, like, I mean, what was the progression for you? I mean, moving into this, you did the first four as the, I guess, you said it before, but I missed it. I almost want to say culminating exercise for college, but that's your military terminology there. But what made you decide to keep moving forward after those initial four, and then push all the way to 51 or something like that? You were in the 50s, like, when you kind of closed it off and you moved on to, correct me if I'm wrong, something with NPR?
Yeah, yeah, we did a podcast with NPR and Texas Public Radio called um it was called, no, I'm forgetting. Oh, Behind the Uniform. Yeah,
Okay.
Behind the Uniform. And uh, you know, eh, that was an incredible experience because we had Cindy Carpian, who's was one of my producers, who's like one of the godmothers of modern podcasting, and she helped. Although she would probably like blush if I mentioned this, she kind of helped stand up a lot of the early days of NPR. And so getting to work with her on that podcast was just a tremendous experience. I had no idea what it was going to be like because I had just worked, as my own kind of independent journalist. So getting to work with this team was completely different. And they raised the bar, they raised the level of what I was doing in a lot of ways because, I remember Mac was one of the first stories that they were really interested in. They were like, we want to dive deep because this guy is just incredible. Like, we want to get to know him better. We want to share Kyle Carpenter's story, Medal of Honor recipient from the Marine Corps. Um, we want to share Josue Baron's story of growing up in Los Angeles and, his experiences. Like just the amount of they really they were really looking for authenticity, and they got that, and that was an incredible experience with them. So getting to share some of those stories in the way that we did and kind of diving deeper into it and working with their team was awesome. And what I learned a lot through that experience was that I don't know much. Like, you're like, oh my gosh, you guys have really been crushing this for a while. And but at the same time, like diving deep into the scripts and getting behind the transcript process. I mean, I remember like literally rereading lines from the narration part like 10 to 15 times and Cindy being like, nope, not good enough. I need you to put inflection here. Like, so, I learned so much in that experience. And one of the more powerful parts of that was, what's the why behind your wow? So I had this bad habit of saying, wow, wow. You're experience because you're just like blown away by some of these experiences. But
Yeah.
she said, why do you say wow? And I said, well, I'm just, I'm experiencing it in the moment when I'm hearing this story. She said, yeah, but dive deeper. Think about why you're saying that wow, and then go deeper and then ask a question behind that wow. And I was like, wow, wow, just like I said right now. There's a deeper experience and there's a deeper moment of learning, and you might be passing up. And it was in particular with this veteran named Jay Fain, who lost his leg in Iraq. And it was a podcast that we didn't even end up doing, but we were diving into his transcript, and he was talking about losing his leg in Iraq and his dad, his father, being on base. It might have actually been an earlier story where he was talking about one of his Marine Corps friends who went off overseas while he was sitting in class at the University of South Carolina, and then hearing about his friend being killed overseas. And I'm getting chills right now because I think about like that feeling of sitting in the classroom, hearing that one of your friends died, and then all of a sudden feeling like, what am I doing? What am I doing here sitting in this classroom? And Jay felt that. And so I said in this moment, I said, wow. But Cindy said to me, she said, but why did you say wow? And I said, well, I was just I can't imagine like sitting in that classroom and hearing the news. So she said, so your mission is to dig even deeper and ask, why did you feel that way in that classroom? And it was like an aha moment,
Mhm.
where I'm thinking even deeper about why I ask the questions that I do. And that's just a deeper level of empathy. That's all that is. Like all of this work is about empathy and sitting down in the room with the person and expressing empathy. And you talked earlier about veterans in storytelling and, does it need to be a veteran from that conflict, or does it need to be a veteran asking the questions? I don't know. I'm not sure, but I do know that a lot of what makes you able to express empathy is the powerful part of that. I think as long as somebody comes into the room and has empathy in the conversation, is willing to listen to the discussion, I think that that person can be a great storyteller. Now, it's up to the veteran if they want to share those stories or not, and totally understand if they don't want to share those stories. But it's a lot on the host or the storyteller sitting down and being willing to express empathy, and that empathy coming from a very genuine place. And that's been my work. Is I was in the Texas Army National Guard. I don't know what it's like to go to the Argonne. I have no idea what that's like. I don't know what it's like to be in Vietnam, dude. I wasn't in Hanoi. I have no idea what that's like. I don't know what it was like to be on the beachhead at Normandy. I have no idea what that was like. I don't know what it was like to be involved in Nagasaki. I don't know what it was like to be in the Bataan Death March. But going into these room and expressing empathy was the biggest deal with any one of these guys that I covered. And I've got to think that there were stories that were left uncovered, that some guys just weren't willing to share because I wasn't there with them. But at the same time, as long as you can come in there with the empathy and humility
Yeah.
and express that, then I think people are going to be much more willing to share their stories and dive deeper into those feelings rather than just coming into the room like some independent journalist and like, well, I'm going to intentionally provoke the conversation and make you stir up old emotions. Like, hey, if I'm coming to you, William, and I'm like, what was it like watching your friend turn into pink mist? Like, there's so much care that goes into carefully crafting these questions
Yeah.
and also spending time. And that gets into the deeper part of storytelling, which is when I started these projects, I was just sitting down in the room with a guy for half a day and just having a conversation. I wouldn't even pick my camera up. I was just asking them questions about their experience in their life, hanging out with them and their families,
Yeah.
getting to know them better for who they were. And then we can explore the deeper conversation. But you have to set the table for that. And it's not some rudimentary process where you're just going into it, like, oh man, I'm sure that this is what I want to get like out of this interview. It's being open to the possibility of deeper meaning. It's being open to the possibility that there's something that that veteran wants to uncover. And me and my friend Jesse had this powerful, profound experience. Another Marine Corps veteran who's just an incredible storyteller himself, Jesse Phillips. But we were sitting in this vehicle with a man named Mark Gordon Hazard, and his nickname was Doc. We're sitting in rural Mississippi in my car, and Jesse's in the back seat, and we're hearing him talk about he's a World War II veteran. Had been in the Battle of the Bulge, was specifically tasked out with his unit to go behind the enemy lines and find SS officers and bring them back for interrogation purposes. So, like real life movie stuff, right? And Mark has, Doc has since passed, but sitting in that vehicle with him, I remember it was just like silence. We're just listening to him talk. And that, again, I'm getting chills because I'm thinking about that moment and I think back to that and I'm like, there's something so powerful in that extra beat of silence,
Yep.
letting that person say what they need to say. And then when a lot of people get uncomfortable and try to fill the space with another question, just letting it go and letting them talk. And he was talking about his grandson or his son and how he felt like their relationship was damaged in a lot of ways. And it was one of the more powerful parts of the interview because he's tearing up talking about how he wished he'd had a deeper connection with his son. And we're like, whoa, like we didn't even try to uncover this, but this is something he's sharing. And then he goes into talking about realizing that they had won the war when when he came home, when he hears from his friends, when he hears from command that it's over, victory has been achieved, and he starts tearing up, and we're watching this legend tear up, going through the memories that he had had on that day, back in I guess 1940, 40 something, 45. Um, Hearing that experience and we're sitting there, we're like just in awe, and that silence, we let that beat go on, and in that beat we got to the deeper meaning in the story. So there's a real power in that.
Man, having that open and having it that person be willing to share on that end. Um, and I do think that that empathetic side it shows through, and that is too. They see your other work out there. They see what you're doing there. I'm sure some of them, if you came to one of them, or it was put out there that they probably listened to some of the other stuff and saw some of the other work, later on down the road and been like, what, this is a good thing. This is happening. They can see it. People can read people. People call bullshit on people. They know. Um, but having opening that conversation, doing it the way that you do, and expressing that empathy in there and being able to not lead the conversation, but have it open to the point to where they start sharing these things like that. That really right there, that's the difference between, content and something real, something that you created that's lasting and a legacy, really. Just with some of the stories that you've said, you've captured this stuff before these people have passed, and these are stories that have never been told before. You know, that right there is something special, and it's special that you were there for it. And you're the person that presented that out there, and I'm sure that mantle would just weighs heavy. Because I know, I did one of them to where the guy's brother had been killed in combat, and we were talking about that end, and I was just, it hit me during, I know what you're talking about, on like, to where it just hit me on, like, I'm like, wow, I had better get this right, and I definitely went into this one not thinking, I got real perspective during it on, like, this is lasting, and this is something that you just put down on track, and you now have a charge to honor, not just this person's memories, but the memory of the brother, and the family's going to listen to this, and there's other people out there that are going to listen to this, and it's heavy, it really is. um
Yeah. I think what you said is really powerful because there is a weight to that. Like there is a real weight. Sitting in the room with Paul Merriman, Iwo Jima survivor, and getting to share those moments, where he was, oh my gosh, there's so many stories from that project. I mean, you could literally create a separate series of podcasts just from the stories that he told and the lessons that he learned from being on Iwo Jima and, his experiences over there. And so, you know, um, I'll go back to Doc Hazard because I kind of want to put you in the room for a second, but you're in an antebellum home in rural Mississippi, in a place called West Point, Mississippi, and you're driving up to the house, and there's flags on both sides of the bridge, U.S. flags, and you're driving up to this antebellum home, and then he greets you at the door, and he's hooked up to oxygen. He's like 95 years old. He's got a dip in his lip, and so heavy Mississippi accent and a dip in the lip. That is a tough interview. So, you're sitting. I remember sitting in the room with him, and I could still hear his oxygen tank. But I remember sitting in the room with him and looking at all sides of these walls as we're sitting in this room. It's just a beautiful home, and he's got a helmet on one of the walls, and it was from the very first SS officer that he killed. He shot him in the head, and so he pulled the helmet off the wall, and I'm holding it. In fact, there's pictures of him holding it that I have. And this story still has not come out through the project, by the way, so I'm just sharing some of my experiences. But it was in his lap, and I remember holding it myself. There's just being like this heavy weight to it. It's like, oh my gosh, man. And when he shot the guy, he yanked his swastika chain off of his neck. So he had that on his wall as well. So I held that swastika chain as well. But just the experience and the weight of the warfare felt through generations. And I'm sure when he was telling those stories, he was very much reliving a lot of those moments.
yeah.
So just incredible. And but back to what I was saying about Paul Merriman and Iwo Jima Marine, you were talking about the weight of these stories, and that's such a true statement because I remember after Paul shared his project, he had it printed out and binded, and he like gave it to some of his family members, and he fell down at one point and broke his arm, and that was really like the his last few days. He spent his last few days in a hospital in Houston, and but I remember his family contacting me through email and just saying like, wow, like thank you so much for doing this for us. Our dad wanted you to know that he was incredibly proud of this, and like he wanted you to be one of the first to know that he passed. And just, to have that, to feel the weight of that. It's like, man, I'm glad that we got that story right. Like, I'm glad that we did well in that story. And one funny story from that experience was we're with him in he lived in a penthouse in like Houston. He had done very well for himself after the war. So when he came back, he went on to start help start a company called Houston Industrial Supply Company, and you could still find his bio on the website. But it was a company that was like $100,000 in debt and had two employees, and he actually bought the company from his old boss. And one day, his boss sees him running on the beach when they were like, on a work trip, and his boss is like, would not sell him the company for anything. And finally, like he sees him running on this beach, and Paul prided himself in running. He ran like every day. And he sees him on this beach. He says, you know what? If you're crazy enough to run on this beach, then we'll let you buy the company. So he's on an old Eastern Airlines flight back to Pennsylvania to like purchase the company. And his boss tells him like he's going to sell it to him for like $10,000, I think. And back then, that was a lot of money. So Paul's sitting on this vehicle, Paul's sitting on this plane next to a lawyer on an Eastern Airlines flight, and the lawyer says to him, "So what are you going to do?" He said, "Well, I'm going to buy this company for $10,000." And he was like, "Paul, how many kids do you have?" And he was like, "I've got five kids." And he was like, "Man, $10,000 is a lot of money. Here's what you're going to tell him. You're going to tell him that you're going to buy the company for $1." And he was like, "I can't do that. Like, he's going to fire me." And he's like, okay, so say he fires you. He's like, go on to start your own thing. So, anyways, he gets into the boardroom with his boss. They've got all their lawyers at the table, and he sits down at this table, and his boss says to him, all right, Paul, we're ready to go forward with the contract negotiations. $10,000 is the deal. And Paul's like, I'll buy it for $1. And his boss is like furious. He's like, get out of the room, like cusses him out up and down. Like, so sends him back to his hotel room. And he gets back to his hotel room and he said he had like 25 messages left for him by his boss. And so he's like hearing these messages, and each one is like getting progressively worse. And finally, like the last message is like, fine, you can have the company for $1. I don't want it anyways. So he got the company, he bought it. And then he ends up turning the company into like $140 million company that operates in 48 states and two countries, and just incredibly successful. So anyways, but the lessons that he learned from Iwo Jima echoed, into his life as he became the CEO of this organization. And I just remember him talking about duty and the power of duty. There was one, they were in a position on Iwo Jima, and him and a corporal by the name of Unger, who was his leadership, uh, his team leader, kept telling guys to go out. There was an enemy sniper, a Japanese sniper, on the hill, and he was just knocking guys, killing guys left and right. The Japanese were incredibly accurate marksmen. And so Paul's, it's his turn in line, and like three of the Marines before him were been shot in the head, like in the same spot. So this guy's just knocking people dead left and right. And so Paul's getting ready to go out, and Paul said to me, he said, guess what I did in that moment? I was like, I don't know. You haven't told me the story yet. He said, Corporal Unger said, all right, it's your turn. And I thought to myself, duty. I have a duty to do as a United States Marine. This is my job. And if it's my job to die, then so I die. And so he's getting ready to run out. And Corporal Unger turns to him and says, well, hell, that's not working. Let's go the different way. So so he's like, and that's why I lived, because that Japanese sniper would have for sure killed me right then. But he's like, the lesson in this is that I was prepared to die for my country because that's what I was sent there to do, and duty is what carried me through. And that became a future lesson that he took into his company when he had one of his friends who was working for Houston Industrial Supply. He was a drunk, was constantly late to work, very intelligent worker, but was showing up late on the job. And Paul personally went back to go pick him up and take him to rehab So he flies all the way back to go pick this guy up for rehab, and the guy is just pissed the whole plane ride, just so upset, like mad at him. I hate you, Paul. Like, you know, you're a terrible human being, you're a terrible boss, just telling him all these things. And he checks him into a rehab center, despite his protests. And the guy ends up leaving the rehab center 3 days later, like walks out and never talks to Paul again. And I remember Paul saying to me, he's like, what do you think? Do you think I regret that I took him to that rehab center? And I was like, I don't know. And he was like, I don't, I don't regret taking him to that rehab center. And he said, duty. He's like, I had a duty to do, and I performed that duty. And I remember the moments on Iwo Jima when I was sent to do my duty, and whether I liked it or not, I was committed to that duty. And I was like, wow, honor, courage, commitment. Like, that is an incredible lesson and one that I'll always remember. So, whether you like the task at hand or not, there's a duty to perform that task. And that was a lesson that I learned from Paul Merriman.
Man, sometimes it's one step after the other, and to reach out and find that thing that drives you forward, whether it be, that is something that's steel your resolve in that duty. Find that something, find what your duty is, and stick to it. Stick to it until that command comes down otherwise. But if you've been given a charge, you know, complete the task. Do it, whether you like it or not. A lot of times in life, the things that you sit down to do, some of the most, once you get through the other side and everything afterwards, you look back and you're like, you know what, that really was actually, a lot of good comes from those ones where you sat down and you pushed through and you pushed through it and you got through the tough time because you didn't see either that rainbow or you didn't see the other side of it. And it doesn't always end up to be a happy ending, but at the same time, again, what did you learn from it? And that's something that you can take forward with you in that next thing. Matter of fact, I mean, really, Tim, like, is there anything like that with you to where you've kind of had like a failure there and then it's really taught you, or you saw it as a failure and it really wasn't, overall, like it taught you something that led you to success within it?
Well, the good thing is that I ne absolutely never fail. I always do everything absolutely right. So I don't know if you know this, I'm perfect.
Champion here, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, night. I mean, 99% of what I feel like what I do is failure. So I think that, I always tell people it's like if you're failing 95% of the time and you're succeeding 5% of that time, then you've built something pretty incredible. So I don't know if that's true in my case, but yeah, I mean, there have been a lot of failures within the work. I feel like, just even from the business standpoint of like learning how to run the project and like you're living essentially at a poverty level while you're doing the work, trying to just do it because of this passion, right? Because of this purity of passion and purpose, and that you love the work, but just so many times like not knowing how to properly go about the business end of the work. It's tough because it's one of those things where as an artist, it's like you want to just create for because you love it so much. But there is a whole other aspect to it, which is understanding whether you're going to incorporate your business or you're going to become a nonprofit or anything like that. Is like I didn't ever stepped into the space of nonprofits because I was always like, I don't want to be competing for other people's dollars. I didn't want to be competing for other veterans organizations' dollars. So um, a lot of the work has been failure, and I think some of the earliest failures in the project were just, not even understanding what it was that I wanted to get out of this work, like not sitting down and really thinking about where it was going to go in the future. And I don't know if that's a mistake. It's just something that, you're not really future thinking through what you want to achieve through the work. I know for myself, a lot of this in the early days was like, I kept talking about it, like, it needs to be a movement. Like, it's not, it's really about legacy. And I started saying that pretty early on. It's really about legacy, but actually, like, one of the most important things that you can do, and this is the lesson to any of the listeners that are listening, is like one of the most important things you can do as an artist is realize that you are also a business owner. Like, that's okay. It's okay to try to get funding. I think there is like a lot of kind of shame built into being an artist and feeling like, oh man, if I'm doing this for the love of it, then I can't go make money at it. I need to be a starving artist. And it's like, no, no, you don't. Like, it's okay to make money at what you do. It's okay to make money at what you love. And it's okay to do that. Now, me in particular, um, in the last few years, this has become more of a part-time thing because I, started working for a creative agency and I worked for a nonprofit. And I learned a lot of things through both organizations that I worked for. But, there's nothing wrong with trying to stand up your organization as a business and trying to be very smart in how you go about it. And like I talked about with Evan Hafer earlier, surrounding yourself with people that are smarter than you, and that reinforces the humility and the fact that you don't know everything. I know I don't know everything when it comes to running this as a business. So there's a lot of important lessons to be learned on the business end of what you do as a creative. And so, I mean, there are guys that could speak to that much better than me. But as an artist, I know that would be probably one of the biggest takeaways from a decade of doing it is like, when you get that letdown moment when somebody says, "Hey, this isn't going to work for us. We're not actually wanting to use this for marketing or for anything for our company." That's okay. Like, your next task is to go out and to search for someone else that's interested in the work.
Yeah.
And it might be for just the purity of the work because they love what you do, or it might be because they see it as marketing for their company, or it might be because they have a grandfather that fought in World War II. It might be any one of those things, but I think it's your duty, going back to that word duty, to try to actually explore that further and to dive deeper into becoming a better businessman or a businesswoman because you're learning the creativity aspects, but you're also needing to learn the fiduciary responsibilities that you have to take on that task properly. So I think that's a lot of things that creatives we tend to overlook. And I think people are becoming better at that with the social media age and the way that it's going. They're becoming more in tune with how to advance what they're doing. But yeah, I mean, the business end of this has always been the hardest part of it, man, for sure. So, but I just love the work. So, I love doing it.
Yeah. Um, and I'm wondering on that end too, like, so you're reopening up the Veterans Project, and you're bringing some of these old episodes back and everything. You had mentioned before that there's some of the stories that were down on, but you didn't present that particular part of the story. Is there some of those kind of either outtakes or unseen footage stuff that's going to be coming forward in the future, like in the way of bolstering some of those episodes and getting it back out there, or is that something that you've considered?
Yeah, I've thought about it in particular with Doc Hazard's story because it is such a powerful one. I mean, it's not even on the project website.
Yeah.
We've actually never transcribed it. And a lot of that is just because I don't even understand what he's saying a lot of the time. So there's a lot of there's there's a lot that I've worked through, when back in the day we were using Otter AI to like I was actually in the early days of the project just sitting there with my iPhone and just recording through voice memos. So that was the early days of the project was there was no podcast. So we're just literally sitting in the room and asking questions, like pre-typed questions like early on in the project where it was like, this is what I want to ask the guy, steps 1 through 25. What was it like being in the army? What unit were you in? who did you serve with? What's it like being a veteran? And it's just like, and then you, after time, you just realize it's like, man, this is all going to be the same if I keep pursuing it this way. So you want to talk about mistakes? There's another mistake right there.
Damn.
Um, Searching for like authentic conversation in is that another mistake with the work when you're when I was about 7 years into this work, I remember one of my friends who's a very creative guy saying to me, dude, what are you doing with Instagram Reels? And I was like, that's not what we do. This is a photo project. And he was like, man, I really feel like you're kind of behind the curve on this. And I was like, we're not behind the curve, dude. This is a photo project. That's what we do. We just don't do that. And it's like, I got my master's degree in emerging media and communication. You think I, of all people, would know, like, hey, when advances come, like, you need to ride the wave and you need to be thinking about what the future of that work is. So then we started doing reels and they go gangbusters, like we started seeing some of those reels, especially with Tulsi, go viral. A lot of that was her, but you're like seeing like the importance of that, but you're like 3, 4 years behind the curve, So that's another lesson that I learned within the work is to always be, future thinking and trying to think about where the work can go and not just limiting yourself to like one avenue of attack and saying like, well, man, I'm a great photographer. I've made it. It's like, okay, yeah, you might be a great photographer, but also what are you doing with video? Oh, you're 4 years behind the curve. Oh, you're way behind the curve. So, you need to be future thinking in the space because, I especially think during the early days, 2014 is like a lot of people were saying like, nobody's going to listen to long form. Nobody's going to read that long of a blog. And so you're just putting your art out and you're like, well, I hope people love this. And then it turns out a lot of people do love it, but then you're kind of sitting in an echo chamber in a lot of ways where it's just like people are just like, great work, good job. Yes, you're killing it. But then you don't realize, like, oh, I'm 4 years behind the curve on Instagram Reels. Like, there are 12-year-olds that know that, like,
Yeah.
Instagram Reels are a thing and you need to be doing it. So, yeah, I mean, it's a ton of lessons in humility and just always realizing, like, you should listen to those voices around you because not all of them are going to be right. But if you surround yourself with wise counsel, then you're going to get a lot of wisdom from other artists who are quite honestly doing it better than you maybe at that moment in time, and you can take from those lessons and make your work even better by listening. So
That just brings it right back. I mean, you said it before, but putting yourself around the people that are there in that space, the ones that are doing something, um, and whatever that is, whether it be, I know I just talked to some of like the clothing company space, or you're talking about Black Rifle, like the coffee space, XYZ, and especially if you have access, or a lot of those people don't realize that there's so many people out there that they're willing to share this stuff. It's their passion. It's what's driving them forward, and they have a real love for it. Because in a lot of this stuff, you have to, or you're not going to get anywhere. And people can see right through the bullshit. They know. They look at it and they're like, oh, that person's just in it for the money or the fame. Insta fame, whatever it might be. But it's that those people that are really in it for the long term, or really in it with a vision for something, especially where it's a visionary. They're making a change within that space, and those are the people to talk to. And I've had some people come back for this show where I was like, wow, I just put it out there and gave it a shot, and holy crap, now I'm speaking to this guy. Like, I can't believe, but all right, let's do this. And I'm still amateur at this, but it's talking with these people along the way, and one small improvement every time. If I keep doing that, you can even just see from, the very beginning, you yourself with the very beginning episodes from there, that progression through. And it doesn't happen overnight, but if you go back and look at, it's an easy way to measure it. Go back and look at, episode 1 through 10 versus, with what you had going on towards your last one with Tulsi there. The night and day difference. right there alone, and it's very clear to see, and it's like, wow, okay, so somewhere along here, every little bit along the way, it adds up over time. So you might get frustrated or pissed off about where you're at now, but it's like, just keep hammering out, man, and don't look at that huge vision of stuff at the very start. Like, have it in mind and have that focus to head towards there. But you're it's gonna change. Your asthma is gonna change along the way. You might even not be pointed it in the wrong way or in the right way. Um, but along that way, you're going to make those improvements and make course correction like we do while we're out on a land nav course, and make that small course correction. Be like, oh, okay. And you might not even know it or see it, but somebody, if you surround yourself with good people, you kind of get bumped onto the track a little quicker. So no, it's phenomenal right there, man.
Yeah, I don't know if there are any New York Giant fans out there, but a guy named Tiki Barber had a really good quote. He was a running back for the Giants back in the day, and I remember he was like a third string running back, if I have this right. But he got his, and I think he might have been undrafted. I'm not quite sure on that, but he had gotten a shot finally through injuries to actually, come into a game and to start. And I just remember this quote about, man, it kind of goes back to that thing of you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Hmm.
And is like, he said, I didn't feel prepared in that moment to be starting running back for the New York Giants. But it's the same thing in being an artist is like, I don't feel prepared to sit in the room with Rudy Reyes. I don't feel prepared to sit in the room with Tulsi Gabbard. Like, you have to take the shot. You have to take the opportunity and put yourself out there because you'll never know. Maybe you do fail. But that failure is a lesson that you take forward into future podcasts, into
Hmm.
future projects, future creative endeavors. So I think it's so important it's easy to get overwhelmed by the moment, but not letting that paralyze you and realizing like I have such an incredible gift to be able to get to sit down with this person and to glean from the knowledge, even just learning from that person in the moment, not even thinking about what this future podcast or project can be or what this painting is going to look like, but thinking about sitting down in the moment with that person and taking it moment by moment, second by second, hanging on their every word and listening to what they have to say so that then that becomes really the authenticity of the movement.
Hmm.
It's not about 10 years, 15 years, 20 years from now, yeah, you can think about where I'm going to be at 5 years, set those goals. But at the same time, it's sitting down in those small individual moments and enjoying that right where you're at, right? I was in Hawaii probably 3 years ago with Tulsi Gabbard. I'm sitting in the studio, and her husband had built her studio out. He's a very talented director of photography, and I'm sitting in her house and I'm listening to her talk, and I'm hanging on every word because I'm thinking to myself, what an incredible opportunity and privilege, regardless of where you stand of politics or what you think of the person. I'm seeing this incredible compassion and I'm learning from this person. And that's really what journalism is like giving everybody an open avenue to speak and to share what they have to say
Yep.
in authenticity, and then sharing that into the world and then saying, hey, you be the judge. You know what you want to take from this, you can take from this, but there is surely a lesson that you can glean from this that you can take forward into your life, even if you disagree with that person, you can still take from that person and learn, and those lessons echo throughout time. And that's the incredible part of that is there's just a beautiful authenticity in feeling that moment and feeling every beat and getting to know that person better. And yeah, so it's an incredible experience. And I'll just say this is like to think back over a decade of all the miles spent, I mean, we were doing like 75,000, 80,000 miles a year on the road. in my vehicle, driving to each of these veterans to share these stories, to meet with them and to tell their stories, sometimes living 3, 4, or 5 days around this person, you know, in the early days, couch surfing, in the later days, we had the privilege of, getting a sponsorship through Hilton, and they took care of a lot of my rooms. And, but no matter what, spending that time out on the road and being willing to listen to each veteran as they share their stories, each human being as they share their stories, and then realizing like this is what the movement is each individual story.
Yeah.
We're building a greater collage. We're building a mosaic of all of the veterans who have taken part. And yeah, we're not going to be able to tell every story, but we're going to be able to tell these stories at the highest level that we possibly can because we owe it to that person.
Yeah.
We owe it to the individual to tell their story in the most authentic way possible. So that's part of that drive and desire that I talked about from Carter Chick is he's gone, and um, I don't have a way to bring him back, but what I do have is that story, and that story echoes, and each person that hits that link and then reads that story gets to be a part of that and gets to know the man better. And there is a real power in that.
That there is. And really that authenticity is something that people people crave. Look at what's a lot of the algorithms and everything out there right now. You if you do anything with content or whatnot, you'll hear back stuff like "be authentic," and they always point to this one guy. I can't remember his name, but he works out in a gym, and he literally just turns the camera on, and yeah, they're still bad and stuff, but he's literally just talking. Hey, this is what I'm doing for the day, and everything else, and it's crazy to me to think that we've gotten to a point as a society that you know eh, part of it's sad, but part of it is also seeing the opportunity of like the sad end is that it's someone's getting that human connection from watching a YouTube video. But on one end, to me, that it's like, hey, you know what? If we've gotten to this point as a society to where that's where they're reaching out, then be part of the positive voice out there and be someone that's out there putting content out that's actually going to give back. I don't ever want to be someone who's just producing content to produce content, but put something out there in the world that someone else can look at and say, you know, I can take something from that. I can actually become a better person or, put some sort of light within my life by consuming this particular content, or I'm going to look for this. Oh, veteran success story. Like I'm a vet having a rough time. And wait a second. They have something with photography or with journalism or, someone who's been there before and seen that journey, what it's taken to get there and the things that they can pick out. It's not every episode is for everyone, but I do know for a fact that some of that stuff out there people glean from these particular things when someone puts those things out there and it speaks to certain people and it says, hey, you know they feel it in their heart, like this is where I need to go next, or I was really struggling with this here, or I couldn't figure this particular situation out. Aha, light bulb moment. And it's been cool to put that stuff out there.
You you have no idea the people that you might affect. That's one of the most beautiful parts of storytelling is when you get that message back is like, I heard so and so on your podcast. That's the reason that I went to rehab. That's the reason why I sought a deeper spiritual connection with God. That's the reason that had that conversation with my wife. That's the reason that I did this or that. That's the reason why I searched deeper meaning with my children. Like when you hear those stories where maybe it's even a guy's past failures, but it's an authentic, honest moment, and then that listener gets back to you and says, William, look, man, this might have honestly saved my life. And if you hadn't had those moments yet, you surely will have those moments in the future. And that's one of the most powerful parts of storytelling is like when you're like realizing like, wow, this literally could have saved this person's life. And it's not about you being great or any of that, but it's about the story getting out there and being put out there in an authentic way. and then watching how that echoes. And I always use this hashtag. I was using this early in the, probably 4 or 5 years ago, but one person, hashtag one person. If it impacts one person, and I lose the lesson all the time, William, like I lose it all the time, right? Like I'm like, oh my gosh, how many people are reading this story? Like, it's important. I need to check the algorithm. Are we growing? Like, what's going on? But I lose that lesson all the time. But really is that's a lot of what this is about is one person. If it affects one person, if it helps one person, you've done your duty within the work and you've transformed a life. And that right there is something you can carry with you as legacy. That's incredible. I mean, how many people can say that, like, you don't know what that conversation is going to lead to.
Yeah.
So there's so much power in that. So what you're doing is incredible because there can be so many conversations that are had just off of that one conversation that you may not know about. And there's a real power. And that person may not even get back to you, may not say, William, this is what saved my life, but maybe it is what saved their life. Maybe it is what chose them to get on that diet that they've always been looking on getting on. Maybe it is the pursuit of going to the gym every morning at 4 a.m. Whatever that looks like. It could be that one conversation that transforms the life and causes them, or maybe they decide to jump into a different art form or a new job. So, it's incredible the profound impact that story can have on a society as a whole.
There's a reason why they're on cave paintings and stuff like that. It's something that's sort of driven humanity and sets us apart in a lot of ways from everything else out there. So why aren't we continuing whatever that format or that medium might be and just keep progressing along the way? And speaking of which, Tim, so like, I mean, what's other than revitalizing, I mean, is there plans in the future for new episodes? Is there what's your way forward?
Well, right now we're on a track for about is we've got so much content that just even resharing these through the YouTube and we're repurposing a lot of it, but we're doing, I'm attacking these reels in a different method and, putting a lot of not to get too into the technicals, but
Yeah.
I'm using a lot of Adobe Premiere right now and CapCut and we're kind of like trying to make this look a little bit different than it's looked in the past. So there is a drive for that, but we have content for like the next year. So year and a half. So right now I'm kind of just creating. This is already taking up a lot of time as is, and I'm kind of trying to decide what's next. But we have had conversations with a few veterans, but right now I'm kind of just biding my time and staying in prayer and just seeing what's next for the work because I think that's a very important aspect of what I do. And I'll never be ashamed of my love for the Lord Jesus Christ. Like he's my savior, and I'm very thankful for that. And I wouldn't be anywhere in this work without him. And I put prayer into everything I do because it's such an important part of the project. But I think like I'm kind of just seeing what's next in the work and just seeing how people react to these coming stories. Right now, we're repurposing and resharing Riley Stevens' father's story, Mick Stevens. In fact, that came out this morning. And so like getting to share that story is incredible. Riley Stevens was a Green Beret in third group who lost his life in Afghanistan, and his dad shares stories of him growing up and raising a war fighter. And a lot of people have never read that story. A lot of people have never listened to that podcast. So now we're going to have the opportunity to reshare that and have a whole lot more people impacted through that work because mixed words are so powerful. The man's a true Texan. He loves Texas. He loves his country, and his son is just like an incredible war fighter, um, who abandoned by Afghan commandos on a rooftop, and shot through the neck and died and bled out within about 20 or 30 seconds, but was just a tremendous warrior till the end. He didn't leave that rooftop, and he knew what was going to happen. He knew his time was up and just fought it out until the very last bitter end. And his dad shares that story on the podcast. And, that was one of the hardest podcasts I ever did because that was a part of the Caregiver Project, which we don't do anymore. But that was one of the hardest projects I've ever done because you're sitting in a room with a guy who lost his son. we had to stop the podcast probably like, I don't know, 6 or 7 times because he's tearing up and he's having a hard time. And Mick is a hard guy. Like he's a tough guy. So you can imagine like sitting in a room with a father who lost their son in combat, and there is nothing you can say to them to bring that man back.
Yeah.
There's nothing I could say to bring Riley back. And sitting in the room with someone like that, who just, choking up in those moments, and it's just incredibly tough. So getting to the deeper meaning in that story, getting to understand and hear the words of a father
Hmm.
who's lost his son. I mean, there is so much power in that, and there's a weight to that. Again, we talked about that earlier, the weight that you feel in making sure that you get the story right. It's like I owe it to that person to be as authentic as possible in my approach. And so, sharing these stories again, like I said, there are people that are going to hear this on your podcast and they didn't know who Mick Stevens was. They didn't know who Riley Stevens was. I've got a friend who's actually a room over from me right now, and he's Third Special Forces Group, Chris Thompson, and he served with Riley. And so these stories connect us, and there's real power in that. So we're going to share that. And then as far as what's next, we're just going in order right now. And I've been thinking a lot about storytelling as a whole and how we tell story because, you know, a lot of what we have done in the past has been chronological, but I like think about like wrapping my brain around a new way of doing that. Like, how do we get to that? Because there are a lot of incredibly talented directors in Hollywood, and other spaces that really like introduce us to story in different ways. They introduce us through the summary, through the ending. I don't know if you remember the movie Glory, but Glory is like for me as a kid, it was like watching those guys die on the beach, like towards the end. Spoiler alert for those of you who haven't seen Glory, but watching those guys die is like, oh no, this was the worst movie I've ever seen, Dad. And my dad's like, and then you see it a second time and you're like, oh my gosh, that is one of the best movies I've ever seen. Like, so thinking a lot about storytelling and the way that we tell stories, and kind of, trying to drive the narrative in a way that's still authentic to
Hmm.
what we're doing, but at the same time, rewraps it in a different way. So, there's going to be a lot of sitting down and thinking about how we approach the work in the future, and the conceptualization of what that looks like. And, that takes a lot of time. But yeah, there will be projects in the future if it's up to me. And yeah, I'm looking forward to some of those and seeing what can come out of it. So yeah, it's exciting. But, it has to be said that losing this World War II generation is really tough. Losing those guys is tough. About 299, I think it was last I checked, a day are being lost. And so losing those stories is a really, really tough one. But I think we're gonna really step into Vietnam because that fascinates me. Like I just have so much respect for what those guys went through and coming back to this country and being treated the way they were. And and many of them still have not had the opportunity, to share their story. So, I sat down with a guy named Mike Stahl probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, and he was Mac VSOG. And so getting to experience that, and like, I think the guy had close to 10 suicide attempts, just went through the ringer and served this country bravely in combat, did 3 tours of Vietnam, and just there's so much to that. So I'm not sure specifically direction where we're going, but I know that we will continue to share stories, and that's really the mark is, and that's a lesson to creators as well, is like, don't be afraid of repurposing content. Like, just do it in a new way. Like, think about how you can grow the work. Attack YouTube, attack Instagram if you haven't attacked Instagram. It's important to think about how you're repackaging the work as well. So just search for new ways to do it. And because I think a lot of the early days, this thing was, we spent time like, we're gonna make this a global project. And it's like, well, maybe like you're in Texas and there are a lot of veterans there that you could cover and you could still do it in a way that's really powerful. So, you know, it can be any one way. It doesn't have to be just one way, you know, but surrounding yourself with people who will share with you and be honest with you about your approach and tell you where your weak spots are, what you can do better. That's, you know, you're constantly learning when you're being a creative. That's a huge part of being a creative is learning and listening to others and realizing your plan of attack through that process.
And the way that people consume the content too is also constantly changing, as well as with the algorithm. Like you could have something that you put out that's just hot shit and guys love it, but the thing is if the algorithm doesn't push it out to the forefront, no one ever even knows it exists.
Mm.
So I mean, there's stuff to where it's like, man, I put X amount of hours, but what, like, how did that not? And then you even have people come back and are like, man, that was fire, but I understand you're new in it, so like just keep pushing, don't get too discouraged, because and it is there's
Uh,
something to be said for someone with 10,000 plus, on one end, or 100,000 plus on one end. There is something to it, but I have to say that, like, if you have a lot of that attention in the beginning, it just doesn't happen that way anyway. For anybody who's out, if it does, you're such a far outlier. Because if you get that attention in the beginning, I can guarantee you ain't ready. You're not ready for it. You know, when I started doing the podcast, not on my end, but doing as a guest. Um, Man, I think the first one I feel that I actually got all right was Combat Story. And that was, people realize afterwards, they asked me, like, well, how many was that? And I was like, I think that was number 54. And they're like, what? You did 54 podcasts to get to that point? I'm like, yeah. And I sucked on most of them.
oh, that's funny. Yeah, that's
You can't be
man,
afraid.
you can't. You know, I think too, that's another thing is like the progression of the way you grow. So, dude, if I stopped creating every time that I got discouraged by a comment or I got discouraged by the amount of reactions to something,
Mhm.
I wouldn't be doing it anymore. Like if I had stopped, and there were plenty of moments along the way where you do feel like stopping. You're like, am I just banging my head against the wall right now, like for nothing? Like what is this for? I mean, it can happen, it can happen 10 years into a work. It doesn't need to be year one. Like you said, you know, you get to 54th to that 54th podcast. It could be podcast number 154. And that's never gonna go away. You always feel a sense of what do people call it, imposter syndrome nowadays, where it's like you feel like you're not quite attacking that in the way, or you're not the person to do that,
Mm.
or you don't feel like you feel like you could do it better, or you feel like you wish you got more comments, or there you wish there was more attention. But that goes back to that thing that I was talking about with hashtag one person. If you're impacting one person, that's an incredible movement in art. It really is. And I don't say that inauthentically. I really mean that. I don't say that as somebody with a pedestal of, 40,000 plus Instagram followers that we built over a decade. I would have said the same thing to you early within the work is like, there would be people that would say to me now, it's like, well, you should be, dude, you should be at like 500,000 followers by now. Like, what's going wrong with the work? Like, what's going on? And then you'll think like, well, why don't I have 1 million followers? That it is what it needs to be. It is where it needs to be at, and that doesn't mean that you don't seek to further the work. But if you're pursuing that thing authentically, then the followers will come. The eyes will come, the listeners will come. And if they don't come, at least you gave it the most authentic approach possible, and you did it in the greatest way that you could with the integrity that you had. And you can hold your head up high and say, you know what, I gave it my best shot and I did everything I could. And those are the lessons that I'm going to learn to take into future endeavors. So there is a real power in that. All the stories that I've gleaned from, including Rudy Reyes, Donald McAllister, Tulsi Gabbard, Frank Denius. Fourth wave at Omaha Beach. How many people get to say that they get to sit with a person like that, and that person gives them the privilege of sharing their time? I remember with Frank Denius, he was still an active lawyer living in Austin. So I'm told at 95 years old that, and not very many people got interviews with this guy. I mean, I remember I had a friend who has a pretty massive platform, and they were told no. Frank's
Oh,
not sharing his story anymore. And so I was given that story through a connection of mine, and they said, "You've got 2 hours with him in his law office, and that's it." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, that 2 hours? That's it?" Like, I'm gonna have to like be so creative about the way I approach this because you gotta think I'm taking photos. This isn't even video. Like, I'm gonna have to like think about all the angles in the room. I'm gonna have to think about how I use the room, about the space in the room. I'm gonna have to like, and it turned out to be one of the best projects that we've ever done. Sitting down in those 2 hours, he knew his story. He knew what it needed to be. He knew what he wanted to share, and he was just extremely open and honest about his experiences in combat. Um, and I mean, they were literally, his unit was responsible for literally stalling out the German forces in the area. I think he had 500 men with him, and they were having to stall a line of German combat troops so that Patton's Third Army could break through that line and get to them. And they were experiencing hand-to-hand combat on this hill. And Frank would tell you, like, in those moments, I just remember shifting and stabbing, and that's all I remember. And he's like, he goes, I can't remember specific men that I killed, but I just remember that I just did whatever I had to do. And so getting down into the nitty-gritty, the hand-to-hand, all that blood, all that suffering, the sweat and tears that those men felt in the moment, and sharing that so openly with me and being honest about his experiences thereafter too, in, experiencing the French children from the school in in and around Normandy writing letters to him as an older man saying, "Thank you. Thank you for our freedom." French kids
yeah.
overseas writing him letters, and just the experience of opening those letters and, understanding the weight of what he had been a part of is incredible. So Frank Denius, and also responsible for, Texas A&M is going to get mad at me for this one, but also responsible for desegregating Texas A&M at the time. Like, he was one of the head lawyers that helped that happen, and he would get death threats. He would get calls to his office. Like, so just the amount of incredible service that these men put in, not just in being in the military, but then stepping outside of it and doing incredible things even beyond that. And that's really the deeper story of triumph that I'm talking about. Like, I want to attack that angle because that is such an important part of the story is where are we going? What are we doing? What are this? I guarantee if you think back right now, if you think back to your moments in combat and you think about what you've learned from that, I guarantee there's a position of triumph in your life. I guarantee there's something that you could find in your story where you go, you know what, Tim, that's it. That's what I have. So I would ask you even now, what is that for you?
Oh man, I mean, really, a lot of that with the stuff with the book tour, but then also pushing it past the end, pushing it past where people had gone before to where, I mean, and I know I've said it before on other podcasts and stuff, but like, so the literal flag from the front cover picture is now hanging in the Airborne and Special Operations Museum. Like,
Wow.
we have literally, there are stories in there. One in particular where a suicide bomber lit himself off, and a ball bearing pinged off of one of the guy's weapon magazines. So he had a PMag, Magpul PMag in there, and it pinged off of that, saved his life. And the guy didn't even know afterwards. The other team leader comes up and he's saying, but that's in the museum. A backpack that was shredded with ball bearings from this particular same suicide bomber. Uh, where someone was standing just moments before, and he had moved because of the actions of someone else that was there. And he was actually performing his duty at the time, didn't even want to, was moving towards this person when this happened. And all of this stuff is now part of the DoD historical archives down there in Fayetteville, part of the museum. And I can be like, to tell the guys that, and to tell them that they can take their kids and grandkids down to this, you know, that right there, being part of something that large. I don't even think I realized it at the time, because a lot of it was just push, 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 do the best possible job that you could, put the guys first and honor these memories. To be able to do that and then look back and say, the strength to do that. I think I had a conversation with my commander about it, because I was like, I don't know about the rest of my career and all that. A lot of the time it seemed like I was hitting my head against a wall. But I can tell you definitively that that portion in the Argandale, which was probably some of the worst that people could get in a lot of ways. I'm not saying it's the worst at all by any means, but I'm just saying it was an extreme instance that was an outlier. And I'm pretty sure with a lot of the other stuff coming from that, and experienced the ripple effect. I've had two other people now, two other books published due to helping coach these other guys get through the publishing process. There's one right here, and Andrew Bragg, Devil's Playground. Another one, Sons of the Argandab, and this one's not even out yet. It comes out in June. But to help those guys and coach them through that process and make those introductions and be like, hey, this is what you want to watch out for. This is what I learned during it. And then for them to even take it even further and watch that ripple effect. And I mean, now from the book social media and stuff, I've had Kiowa pilots reach out and send me footage from above, like from the days that we were on the ground, during certain things.
Incredible.
Send in journal stuff. I literally had Afghan children that were 10 years old at the time that we met out there on the battlefield that would kind of follow us around, reach out and go, um, I know you guys. I recognize that patch. I remember you. And describe very vividly, because I was like, okay, this is some BS, but describe very vividly exactly what happened, where we were, and certain things. And I was just like, holy crap, they're not bullshitting me. Um, to have that
It's amazing.
reach and where this has gone. And I told my commander, I'm like, I know definitively that I was meant to be there at that specific time. And I have that same feeling with some of this project. And I'm just going to follow it, and sometimes it is. Sometimes it's one foot in front of the next. But I'm just going to keep going. And that taught me that. And those guys taught me that. That leadership put that there, and kind of put that charge there. And that's what drives me sometimes. And that's what, it's those instances. And I said it before, it's the most extremes that you'll get. The uh, war can give you the ultimate highs and the ultimate lows. And having experienced life, it just makes that spectrum in the middle and everything so much sweeter. So, I mean, I don't look at it as a crutch. I actually look at it as, again, and I'll say it again, instead of uh, being beaten down, we were really forged. And the guys that realize that and the guys that move forward have done incredible things. There's so many guys that were on that deployment and from that unit that have done incredible things in moving forward. It was a real honor to serve with those guys, especially with that type of background, and see where they've gone since then, and the drive that they've had from there. The ones that really have realized what was either handed to them, or that what they went through uh, was forging them as opposed to beating them down. It's perspective. It really is. It's perspective.
My dad has a saying that he always says. He says, You're going to go through things in life, whether you like them or not. It's all about the attitude that gets you through it. And you can either make that thing go really slow, or you can make it go a lot more quickly with a good attitude. So
Yep.
I try to carry that with me. And look, again, I lose the lesson sometimes, right? Like, where you're like, oh my gosh, like this is going really, really slow. But it really is a perspective and
Yep.
it really is about carrying a good attitude through it. So, I mean, much more so experienced by you guys, having been there. I can imagine like the attitude, shifts and like what it must have been like on the ground to experience experiencing the emotion and the weight of that. So, there can't be enough respect shown to the men on the ground who were over there and experiencing that very heavy level of combat and being in a space like that. And the effects of that felt, over here. I mean, think about how many times you could mention Argandab to people and have them, hey, point to that on a map.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know that I could do it, in the moment. Like, I don't know if you gave me a map of Afghanistan, I would be able to point to it. So, just the reverence that I have for you guys having been over there is just, I can't state it enough. But man, the stories that must have come through there, and you just showed me two other books, but like the stories that came out of that, and for you to detail and to write those down that's going to resonate with people in the future. You have no idea who that's going to impact 20, 30, 40 years from now, much less who it's impacting right now in this very moment that's sitting down and reading a chapter while we have this very discussion.
Yeah.
So it's pretty incredible. It's like Inception in some ways. It's like it's a dream within a dream.
So my platoon sergeant that was, in the book, he just retired. I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago, but he just retired. And um, he had said he gave me a call, after he saw it in clothing and sales, but he gave me a call and he's like, he's at sergeant major level and he's around division a lot. And he's like, Yeski, you have no idea, man. Like, I walk into offices and your book's on the freaking shelf, and I don't say anything, but I chuckle to myself, like seeing this ripple effect through there. And a lot of it was presented, I think it was John Troxel. So SAAC, John Troxel is a second, the senior enlisted advisor to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I mean, it's like a man who's dedicated his life to the military and stuff came out and said, thank you for presenting this from the Joe level that you did. Like, it doesn't happen often to where we get to see that end of things. And I don't think it's ever been written on the GWA end of things that, like, thank you for putting this down. And he actually ended up putting me into something that was a recommendation, I think, for Sergeant Major's Academy, as reading for it, just because of, he's like, this gives a really good picture of what's going through the head of the men that were there on the ground at the time. So it just goes to show that you never know those effects. You don't know where it's going to end up and everything. I can guarantee you the Veterans Project and stuff, I mean, it's finding its way out there and what you're doing with preserving those memories within that, and what you have done and what you're kind of either repurposing or finding the way forward in there. It's admirable, man. It really
Heck yeah.
is.
I really appreciate that. One of my favorite experiences within this work has been I got called in by, it was actually a woman who had gone to my college, and she was a college basketball player there, Chelsea. And she was teaching at a private school in San Antonio, and she asked me to come speak to the elementary kids in her class, and I was like, nothing quite like I've spoken on some pretty large platforms. Like I spoke at Sornex during Summer Strong. Like, there's a bunch of SEC coaches there. Not fearful at all. I felt so pumped to share Alfred Hawes' story. Um, but stepping into an elementary classroom is like where you discover fear. And it's like, what am I going to be able to say to these kids that's going to really resonate with them? What is that? But I remember sharing stories again back of my squad leader, and I showed them pictures, and I showed them pictures of his kids and him sitting with his wife on the couch, and I talked about what an awesome guy he was and how he was a Marine, and then you're starting to see these kids like their eyes light up, and then you're sharing the stories of, I would usually find like some of the more perspectives of being in combat, but shaping it in a way that the students could then understand, at that level, and then sharing stories of their kids and how much it meant for them to see their dad come home and be there with them. And so, like these kids who don't otherwise know the military, maybe like there's one, two kids in the room whose dad serves or something like that, or mom serves, but these kids are hearing these stories, and so getting to share those stories with even elementary class, like getting to watch their eyes light up when they hear stories of Alfred Hawes, or when they hear stories of Rudy Reyes, or they love Rudy, man. Like, yeah, they just love Rudy. But like hearing these stories of these kids, like it's like almost like you're seeing them in comic books, But and so, Rudy talked about this when he said, kind of like the modern experience of veterans is like it belies the dignity of the real experience that we go through. We're not comic book heroes, but then in a way kind of reverse engineering that and making them the comic book heroes and telling these kids about these guys like these are real life heroes. This is what a hero really looks like. And we're not perfect and we don't do everything right all the time, but look at these guys and look at what they accomplished and look what they did for you so we could sit in this classroom right now and have this conversation. And making it breaking it down into bite-sized pieces so they can understand it is like that's an incredible part of the experience. So yeah, it's cool to see, like, think about future generations and what that might affect, and the fact that like they may be signing up in the future because of those conversations. They might find, I remember being in Hawaii, and again, this isn't, I'm not trying to make this about myself, but this was a really cool experience, is that we're on this 50-mile hike, across the island of Hawaii, and with 50 for the Fallen, Chad Conley's group, who's a former Green Beret, and I'm with Tulsi Gabbard, and Tulsi was like, "Hey Tim, I want you to meet this guy," and I was like, "Okay, cool." Like, and he's a Green Beret, he's in 10th group, and I was like, cool. And he like starts talking to me. He's like, hey man, I just want to say, like, me, of course, I had some conversations with my dad before I decided to join the army, but it was your story on, I can't remember who it was. It was a Green Beret, and he said it was your story on one of the Green Berets that made me decide that I wanted to go and try and be a Green Beret. And I'm like, wow. Like, and now he is a Green Beret. Now he's like an ultra athlete, like doing these, ultra marathons and stuff too. So getting to see like the impact that that can have on like future generations of warfighters is incredible. And again, it's not me. It's not me being I'm just a conduit to get to be able to tell these stories. So I tell people all the time, I'm like, somebody else could do could do this work. I just chose to do it. It was like very much, up to what I believe I attribute to God, and also just like being in the room with the right people at the right time. Marilyn Wallagore, introducing me to the work, and giving me this rare privilege of being able to share the stories. But this is the lesson to anyone, is like you can step into the space and you can share the stories. And I think that it's important. Yes, it is important in our space to be a veteran, but at the same time, it's like if you want to try to tell those stories, you should try to tell those stories. We need more great storytellers. We really
Yeah.
do. Like, we do. So I think stepping into that space, and with humility and authenticity is going to lead you to those right and proper places. And, if it affects one person, you've made all the changes that you need to make. And that's an incredible and rare privilege in life. I mean, because how many people are out there searching for a purpose in their life or looking for something, and ultimately they may never find that thing that they really want. They may never find that thing that they really want to do. So being able to find something that it becomes your drive and desire, and not all encompassing life, not saying like worshiping the work, but being able to get to do it really is a privilege.
And coming at it from a humble side, like you have, that is, and you continue to do, and that's refreshing to see as well. Um, I think that that is an important thing, and those opportunities to do that, or that progression within that field, it happens, but I do think that it happens in a way to when you are aligned in the right way, that's when that starts to happen. And it's through, like for yourself, the prayer, meditation is something that I use a lot as well. And it's really, I feel like that same thing. You're putting yourself in tune. You're putting yourself in tune with everything around you. And you're also having to self reflect a lot there as well and say, hey, like, what are your motivations here? And really become comfortable with that and become comfortable with, either sacrificing to put that out there or, you know, becoming what you preach. And that is, it's a hard charge. It is a hard charge, but
And I think one of the things that really awakens you to the work that you're doing too, and really reinforces that humility is sitting in the room with a World War II veteran like a Paul Merriman, and having him ask me the very real question of, so what do you like do for work? And you're just
people get
like,
paid for this? You got to be kidding me.
yeah, yeah, it's like, it is this very successful man, he's built this massive company, and you're just like sitting there like, oh man, and I think that's also a greater lesson is that too is like, yes, you should pursue that thing if you believe in it, and you should try to understand the business end of it, but at the same time, if it's your side hustle, if it's something you just do out of love, that's beautiful too.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Like, don't ever run away from that. There's so many great creatives and so many great artists I know in this world who have a regular 9 to 5 job and very much find purpose in that job as well. And then on the side are building this other thing that they love. And I've done that. I did that for 2 or 3 years, within this space of like working at a creative agency. And that opened my mind up even more to how I needed to change the work and to develop it. So I would tell people like don't run from that either. Like structure is a very good thing. I had a conversation with a friend about this the other day. Is like sometimes we get in our own echo chamber as creatives and like we just push forward. And that kind of goes back to what I was saying about reels earlier. It's like you're 4 years behind the curve when it comes to this thing. Like when you step into an environment like a creative agency or something like that, it's like you've got other creative people around you who are teaching you the things that you neglected. For example, one thing is my web pages were always loading very slowly, and I remember sending images off to one of our creative directors at my agency I was working at, and she's like, sends me like an NWA like meme, like don't send me this shit anymore, like, like and you're like laughing, you're like, oh my gosh, like I just got humbled, it's like because I'm sending the file sizes of like 10 megabytes as to where they should have been 2 megabytes, for faster load times. And you're learning like, oh wow, I didn't know that, so that was almost a decade into the work that I'm learning these lessons. So always be open to learning because there's gonna be somebody in your space that's better at what they do than you are. And that specific thing may be the thing that you need and the hurdle that you need to conquer in order to get to the next level.
Or in my case, another a humbling one as well. It only took me, what is it? I think it was episode 19 when I had an editor in chief on, where he's like, "I just can't let this go, man." But on your shorts, veteran success story is spelled wrong, and I'm like, "Wait, what?" Yeah,
That's
19
awesome.
episodes with success, for a success-based podcast with success spelled with one C. And I'm like, you've
Oh
got to be
man.
kidding me.
That's awesome. That's
So,
hilarious.
Tim, where can people find the Veterans Project and some of the stuff that you're doing out there?
Yeah, so you can go to the website. It's www.thevetsproject.com. We're on Instagram at the Veterans Project. We're at Facebook. We're on Facebook, the Veterans Project, and then we're on X as well, Threads as well, and then let's see what else. And then YouTube, of course. So we've got the Veterans Project on YouTube. So,
Yeah.
um, I just want to say that it's a privilege to be on your podcast, and I'm really thankful for the opportunity, man. So keep rocking at what you're doing and keep pursuing it. And that love and desire that you have to share other people's stories is really powerful.
Yeah, and same to you, man. Don't stop now, because the stuff you have out there is it's phenomenal. Like I said, it's something that's inspired me along the way as well. Like I got to have Tim on at some point to talk to him with it, just because. But for the people that are listening, I'll put that stuff down in the description link as well, so it'll just be an easy one click for them, for the Veterans Project. But Tim, again, thanks for coming on the show and sharing, man. It's been great having you on and talking.
Man, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening in on another episode of Veteran Success Story. I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. I'm going to put everything on where you can find Tim, the Veterans Project, and some of the other projects that he's worked on, within the description link, below. So make sure you check that. And, you know, if you guys enjoyed the episode, tell a friend, tell some other people, reach out. If you haven't yet, follow and subscribe. I just know a lot of people that are tuning in to listen to the content, they're not subscribed, which is interesting because I can see when they come back. So they keep coming back for more of this content, but just subscribe. I'm not going to inundate you guys with ads or anything like that, or at least not currently. So looking into a few different avenues to continue this, but need a little bit of help in there. So if you guys could, it goes a long way when you do that. So again, join me next week for another episode of Veteran Success Story. I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I'm telling you guys, the guests that are upcoming, it's going to be some good stuff. So appreciate it. Again, follow, subscribe, tell a friend, and I hope you enjoyed the episode. And this has been yet another episode of Veteran Success Story.